Hi, everyone. My name is Kenji Maeda. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to first acknowledge that we are on, I am currently on the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I also want to mention that I grew up on the unceded territories of the Lakota people, Wiwei-Kai, Wiwei-Kam, and Kuyaka First Nations. And it's been in particular during COVID time when I can't go back to, and it's also known as Campbell River, a thing that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of where I am and where I can't be right now to spend time with my mother as well. And so what today is going to look like, we're just going to do some introductions first, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about the webinar, and then we're going to go into it. Just a couple technical things. For those of you who require captioning, hopefully you've already turned on the captioning option, and I want to say thank you to Kimberly for being here, for being our live captioner today. I also want to mention that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A window. And that is where, if we can get to any questions, we'll try and answer them by looking at those. But I can't promise you that any questions will be answered because it's not a professional development webinar. This is a different kind of webinar, and it's a bit of a test in some ways. So I'm going to ask Fay and Carmen to turn on their cameras now. And I'll introduce myself. We're all going to do some self-introductions first. Again, my name is Kenji, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. In addition to being the ED of GVPTA, I work for a program called ArtsFest. But for me in particular, what I want to share is that my background is as an Okinawan Japanese Canadian, and I bring that to the room, and it has influenced a lot of how I think and what I do, and I'm grateful for that. So I'm going to pass it over to Carmen. Do you want to do a self-introduction?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carmen Alatorre. I am a Latinx costume designer coming from Mexico as an immigrant. Also very grateful and lucky to be working here.
Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Fay, and at the moment I live on the unceded territory of people of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, originally from Iran. And very much like Kenji, a lot of my work revolves around the kind of notion of existing in diaspora, and is often influenced by my Iranian-Canadian identity. I'm the artistic director of the Frank Theatre Company in Vancouver, as well as the founder and artistic director of Aphotic Theatre. But outside of that, I am a freelance theater director, dramaturg, producer, educator, and do cultural consultation with different organizations time to time. I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you. And before we start going into the questions I'm asking myself kind of portion, I just wanted to provide some context as the inaugural webinar, and we're going to have some more coming up next month and into September and October as well. I was telling Fay and Carmen that I rarely get nervous for these kinds of things, but I was nervous about this because whenever I do webinars, it's usually a very clear A to B around like a progression of learning something, presenting something. And the nervousness comes from the notion that we have a sense of what the A is, where we're starting from, but I don't know where we're going. And but it's also the thing that really excites me. One of the things that we're seeing right now in the community, not just the arts community, is that there's a lot of pointing to organizations and the systems that are out there that are challenging to live with for many reasons. And there's a lot of black and whiteness in terms of conversations. And in some ways, I haven't seen as many of the nuanced conversations in a public sphere. We might have it when we're having check-in conversations with our friends or one-on-ones. And I wanted to test out and see if this is a possibility in a digital and in a more public space. I also want to mention, which is also in the description of the webinar series, that this is not a workshop and this is not an expert panel, that what we're trying to do is have a true conversation between the three of us to really deeply explore the curiosities of the now. And so each of us are going to share some of the questions and dig a little bit deeper and to respond as truthfully as possible. So that's kind of the goal. And thank you, all of you, for being here to witness this as well. So why don't we get started? Fay, do you want to start with your question that you kind of shared with us?
Sure. Is it because before we started, I said I'm always nervous, and you're like trying to like throw that on me?
Yeah.
Sounds good. It's a very unfair move, but okay. Okay. So my question, like, I mean, there are a few like questions, but I guess like one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and I really love the format that Kenji you have introduced in terms of like questions that we don't ask others necessarily, but questions that we're asking ourselves. And I really love that framing. So one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is like the notion of like how, as someone who has been working in advocacy for over 20 years, I find the public sphere quite scary. And my question is often like, how much should I continue fighting, and who am I fighting for? And in thinking about that, like, what's my responsibility as a leader of an organization that has a very specific mandate, and what is my responsibility as an individual? Where do I step in and say something, especially on social media when I say injustice, and where do I observe and decenter myself? So that's kind of like, I guess, like the push and pull between those two kind of identities as a leader that has a different persona, and as a person who has been doing that fight, I find myself in that kind of push and pull of like, yeah, what kind of spaces should I occupy? When should I decenter myself? And what kind of precaution my statement has, or not making a statement. Yeah.
So I mean, it's definitely something that I've thought about a lot as well. And but also, like, do you have a sense of like where you've landed, or where have you landed in that push and pull between the two?
Okay, I think for me, especially during this pandemic, it has become very clear, like first of all, taking care of myself. Like, where do I like make sure that like I like just living in my body. I have already experienced so much trauma, and I have also like thought that it's my life mission to fight for others who have experiences like those kind of like lived experiences. But at this point, I felt like there are times that I just like don't know if I can deal with the injury that would come from people from the public sphere, right? Like, so like I was like, during this pandemic, you're thinking about so many things, from your family, your friends, being away, living in diaspora. I'm like, I don't have the same level of energy that I would have had maybe 8 months ago. So I kind of became a bit more specific about like the things that were really kind of like, there was like black and white for me, that I have to make a comment and step in. But I also find myself quieter than I usually am, especially in my leadership position. So yeah, so I think like I was like, taking like time to do self-care a little bit, so then I can spend the energy to those around me that I know I can take care of,
And I mean, it's interesting because for those of us who are in a hierarchical power position, so in organizations, these sometimes the conversations with our board, like, it's an interesting thing, because when an organization does responds to something, then oftentimes our responsibility, in quotes, is to have the board agree and to have a consensus. And and sometimes I struggle with the idea that do we actually need to have consensus to make a statement or to say something, and even though we're employed by them in some ways. And I mean, even for you, like Carmen, like the idea that you as artists as well, right? Like as artists, we're employed, we're part of that system, and we're employed by them, and so how much does that have to or need to influence our what we say, I guess.
I think enormously. You know, I think it's wise. When Fay mentions that she has to take care of herself too, it's been emotional times for all of us in so many ways in the arts, particularly in theater where the three of us work. But I guess you have to take the time to contemplate what are the situations when you're going to actually put yourself out there, and what consequences can that happen. You know, like you have to choose your battles in that sense. I feel it's important to be there for others, and it's important to be supportive. And I think it's crucial to be talking about things that are difficult at the moment, but that doesn't mean we have to be constantly fighting the fight every day. That can be hard.
But so, sorry, I keep on asking questions because I'm just so interested. But like, so I think that's where it's interesting to me, because so Fay, when you talk about the leadership position and our responsibility, and so if we stay silent, or if we don't act quick enough, then it can be viewed as you're not doing enough, right? And I think that's where the challenge is as well.
Totally. But I also kind of think that's like, I mean, you know, specifically what I was talking about was like, you know, in the beginning that like everyone was like, you know, sending out statements, for example, about like, we will never go back to normal, or like, you know, like what is the normal? Like, you know, and everyone was like, you know, posting things that this is what we're going, this is not, you know, and I just kind of felt like, and I mean, maybe this is again, a cultural thing, you know, like maybe it is my Middle Eastern upbringing, that the concept of time, it's a very different thing, you know, like for me, I need to kind of sit and think and ponder, you know, like it is like for me, like the idea of like reactionary responses is not a natural position for me. And so like, and I think like, you know, sometimes it can be read differently when you're individual versus you're in a, you know, leadership position, you know. So I was kind of like, okay, let's just kind of like first see what the hell just happened, you know, like we are in it, and then like, you know, we need time to understand it, to settle, and then see what happens to our programming, like what kind of a statement should we like send out, you know, like who we gonna protect. And you know, for me, like with our organization, it's like always like kind of centering the work on the queer, POC, and immigrants. So it's like, you know, those are the works that we have to keep, what are the works that we have to let go, you know, like, but it takes time, like, you know. And I think that's like sometimes for me, I guess like in that question of like individual versus leadership position, is like I see a lot of like kind of I've been doing the work for so long, and then I so know that there are some people that they are living that life, and then there are other that they're just like talking a lot about things, you know. And I also have that fear of like, I don't want to be those people, you know, that is like, you know, this moment that like the iron is hot and it's something is trendy, or like, you know, so everyone is just talking, you know, and there's so much noise. So I kind of like feel like, you know, for me, I like need to take my actions a little bit slower than maybe North America. So that's like maybe part of it too. And Carmen, like what, I'm just wondering, like in that, like what kind of what was your, like we have talked about it you know, over drinks, but like what was like your way of dealing with it, like?
Well, I guess I'm slightly different than you guys, because I'm not necessarily on a leadership position, right? But I am a freelancer. So in a way, I guess I do have a voice in our community in terms of our art and the spaces that I occupy. But yeah, this has been time of contemplation and reflection as well. And I definitely 100% agree with Fay. The way that I deal with conflict, or with, you know, pondering over our reality at the moment and how are we gonna come back to theater when we come back, is by taking my time to think about it. You know, I usually have a tendency to have a very strong gut reaction to difficult conversations, and my impulse would be to just jump and just say something really emotional. but I guess that has proven in the past to not very efficient. So I think it's just better to just wait a few days, perhaps have a conversation with the people I feel close to in my community, to get at least different angles of every situation, and then create an opinion based on that, and then decide whether you want to participate or be proactive in the change, or maybe that is not your place to do it.
I wouldn't say that emotion, speaking from emotions is a bad thing though, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely, but I guess in my particular case, sometimes speaking from emotion can get confusing. I feel like I can be a million times more articulate once I let that emotion just sit for a few days, as opposed to just being like, but why? And perhaps even, you know, crying a little bit. So I have nothing against emotion. It's more about trying to explain myself in better ways, right? Without creating any harm to anybody, or as you know, as least harm as possible.
Yeah. One of the things that comes up is through one of the questions that also I posed as well, which kind of ties into this, is the piece around the urgency versus getting it right. And I know that, again, there's also kind of the emotion piece. And I mean, there's also a question about the Black Lives Movement, Kona has asked. But so when GVPTA, very early on in you know, in the movement, we were asked about the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and the statements, and a part of me is like, okay, well, what is the right thing to say, and what is the thing that I can say right now? And it was interesting because what we ended up doing, and what I ended up doing as the so-called leader of the organization, is that I spoke from the heart as much as possible. Like, it was not one of the challenges that I remember seeing all the very rote responses and statements that were coming out from organizations and other leaders. And it's like, this comes from your PR department. This is actually not from you as individuals, like, clearly. And it was very frustrating to me. And I didn't want to be another one of those, right? And it's like this, it's so when like 100 organizations come out on one day saying a statement, and then part of me is like, okay, well, if I also create a statement on that one day, will my statement I'm considering coming from the heart is amongst the 100, will it get lost? And then, and I'm like, oh, so maybe I should just wait one more day, or like, it's like all these things that kind of come into my mind around how can I amplify the message in a way that is effective and real and truthful, amongst all the kind of not truthful, I don't know, like, right, the not so authentic messages that are out there. And anyway, so we ended up, we posted it, and I feel good about it, because it was my words. It wasn't actually, it was my words as the executive director of the organization. I did not go to the board and say, can I write this statement? Because I didn't feel like that was needed. It's too urgent to write something. Like, I needed to do it now. And it was like a part of a spark of, this is the right time to do it, because it's actually, it's like a writer, like, it just comes out of you at a certain time, and you can't stop it and you can't suppress it. But I did question about what is the right words to use and the urgency. and it was like this weird kind of balancing act. I don't know, it's really
I feel like organizations in a way, like it's okay that they have their public, their publicist official voice, right? I think it's just part of the world we live in. But I also would definitely celebrate that the fact that we can also just be emotional and just honest and put our hearts out there. I guess for me, what's important for me is to organize my emotions a little bit, not erase them, just try to organize them in a way that I could just communicate them in a better way. I think that's important too, but perhaps we should just normalize as well putting those emotions in our public statements, in organizations. Maybe there are some of them who have been doing that. I'm not aware of it. But.
And I guess that's what like also like saying that like what is the fight that like you decenter yourself, and what is the fight that like for like with like for example, I wasn't thinking about Black Lives Matter, but like with that like right away we sent a statement, because that is like kind of like viscerally like something that I cannot even control my emotions. I don't even care, like, so like it's just like it has to be out, it has to be, you know what I mean? But there were certain other situations that happened in the past 5 months that it was kind of like, do I even want to, like, but like with certain things, like I feel like it also becomes like something that's like for me personally, like every single like thing that I remember for the past 20 years of my career, like it's like the values that I believe in and why I'm running the organization that shares the same value system, and those things are not separate or performative. Like it's like genuinely something that was like I was crying for 24 hours, so it's like, it's just like, and so that emotion just kind of comes out in that statement, or like, and those are the things that are interesting, because the positionality of an individual and a leader becomes one, like I cannot distinguish like the things that are like, I don't know, like the obvious injustices like that. I think they're just kind of obvious.
Yeah, and for me, the question in relation to what both of you are saying is, lately it has been like, how can I actually be proactive? Like, is my voice actually gonna help? I guess it's important to just be there for support, but I also question, like, is it realistic that if I say something, it's gonna change things in this particular case? Or where are the areas within the theater world, which is where I work, where I can actually have a conversation with my colleagues and start moving like one step at a time towards actual change, right? Because in the past, we just didn't have time to try and create any change. We've all been so overworked and so worn out that I just feel like this is such valuable time to be able to actually do something tangible about change.
Yeah. And Carmen, you were the question that you were going to pose as well was around a bit of the change question moving forward. Do you want to?
Yeah, so it's I guess the question when we were invited to the panel was, what have you been thinking in terms of your work in the arts? And for me, clearly has been a very long reflection about before COVID. Like I said, I guess most of us theater people, particularly designers, have been incredibly overworked for years and years and years. And so now that we don't have that, I feel a lot more clear about it. I feel like I still love the theater work that I do, and I wouldn't want it to disappear, and I wouldn't want to walk away from it. However, I also know that the ways in which I was participating in it, or the way it used to work, is definitely not sustainable. So yeah, how does it look like when we come back, and are there any potential ways that we can come back to a more, again, sustainable, more inclusive, fair way of doing things, where we can actually normalize being human and having some days off, and making a living wage and having some benefits as freelancers, So those are the questions that within my designers community we have been consistently talking about. However, we don't always necessarily have just the tools or the direct access to those things. But those are definitely the things that have been in my mind. The fact that I do want to come back to a theater industry for sure. I just, I'm wondering whether I would come back if it means being so worn out again and so financially stressed and all of those things that you guys know. So that's my big theater question out there for you.
There was a list of things that you're looking for.
Yeah, just
there.
a small list.
Of the list, are there ones that you would prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, right now, just because the anti-racial subject is so fresh in our minds, that is definitely what has hit the most. And I was just like a couple hours ago, I was just talking with a couple of designers about it too. And it's not that I personally, I don't feel like the theater world has been unfair to me. I have had plenty of opportunities and access to things. However, I feel like it could definitely be better, and so that more artists of color jump into the design world as well. And so the big particular question is, how do we tackle that, and do we have the power to do it? And it seems like it perhaps stems from schools, and you know, yeah, there are some particular steps that we can take towards that change, and it has to do with decolonizing the way we're teaching. You know, I don't even know, that's such a big question as well, but not only teaching myself as an instructor, I have done that too, where I've only been teaching everything in a very Eurocentric way. So I'm also just questioning how to change those ways. And what are the emerging artists that we're bringing into the professional world. So I think it all comes from there, and then hopefully in a few years, we are gonna see a more diverse theater design crowd. So that is one of them, but the second one would be, again, is it even worth it, you know, bringing in more people into a job that so far has been so difficult in that sense, so beautiful and so difficult, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, like, you know, for me, like, I've been thinking so much about it as, like, you know, this work that we do, that, you know, I have lost friendships throughout the years because I'm like, I'm busy. And they think, like, you know, you're just like being an arrogant bastard, you know, like, it's like, how can you be so busy all the fucking time? But, you know, like, this, like, 7 days a week and all of that bullshit. But at the same time, like, I think it was 2 weeks ago for an A Space at Queer Art Festival Underground Absolute Fiction, we physically met, social distancing with mask, in order to film it. And I was like just like the joy of being in that space. I'm like, I have friends that they're working in major organizations that they have, like, you know, 3 months off, you know, and they make so much money, and they were all crying that they have to go back to work from home. And, like, you know, we all are, like, you know, enthusiastically looking forward to the day that we can meet again and gather. And I think there is something, like, super, like, beautiful about that is kind of like, I don't know, like, it's just, like, hard to think about that, like, it is unfair and isn't unjust, but then, like, the pleasure we get from our work, and how unhappy most people that I know are working, you know, and, like, our work is our livability and, like, our joy and our happiness. So
Yeah.
but it doesn't need to, like, you know, also destroy us.
No, exactly. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Can we please normalize having a human life where we can, I mean, one, for me, like, where I don't have to juggle, or we as designers don't have to juggle 3 productions at the same time to survive. And, you know, in so many cases, we don't get a day off in months, and that's just okay, because we work in the arts and we're lucky to be there. So just do the work. But then, like, you guys, like you, Fay, so many times I just can't see my friends. I can't go to a wedding. It's just not sustainable.
I have a quick question, Carmen. Like you said that, like, you haven't, and we have talked about this before, but you haven't personally experienced, like, discrimination or unfairness as a designer in the theater industry. And but and then linking that to you saying that, like, how busy you have been, because I'm just kind of like thinking about that notion, because like in my case, like I have faced every single fucking barrier that could possibly face, like in terms of discrimination, from undergrad to my master's to everyday professional world. And I think part of the reason that I say yes to so many projects is because of this sense of scarcity of like, okay, as a POC queer person, like like maybe like right now I'm getting 2 projects, I have to say yes because maybe for the next 5 years people don't say anything. And so like I'm just kind of wondering, like in your case, that work is coming and it has been luckily kind of constant, what is it that makes you to say yes to so many things? If
it's exactly that. And when I say I guess I don't mean to say that I have never lived through any kind of racism at all. What I mean is that I just want to be clear that I am grateful that I just don't feel like I have had a lot of doors shut in my face. But I guess there's definitely been the difficulty of navigating worlds where I am the only person who's not white, for sure. And that has happened throughout my education, throughout the my professional work, and sometimes through my teaching. So yeah, but to your question, getting so many gigs, I guess it's perhaps just what's normal for freelancers. It's the only, if you want to work full time as a designer, you need to take on as many projects as you can possibly handle, and it varies from discipline to discipline. Like set designers perhaps are not able to take as many projects as lighting designers, and through those costume designers perhaps we're the ones who spend the most time in residence in the theater. So in general, for me to survive as a full-time designer or only doing design work, I have to do between 9 to 10 shows a year.
Right.
And or the other option would be getting a part-time job that will, but that still keeps you in like overworked, in this overworked mentality, and also just not having hardly any time off. It's difficult to have time off, and when you do, you're completely depleted of any kind of energy or happiness or anything.
Totally. I have one more question that you said about like diversity within like education and like training. Like in my experience, like I think that's definitely true. Like people talk about like how come like there's, and it is definitely a lot of it from the training programs. But don't you think that it's also about who is teaching those programs? Because like I mean, I come from like a world that's like literally all of the people in the program were Eurocentric and white, and we had like people that they were put on probation in our program because they had accents. And like at the same time that they could not audition for main stages because of their accent, the university would decide to do like production of Carol Churchill like Fen, which involves like Japanese workers, and the Japanese students were on probation and they would cast white people to do Japanese accents. Like I'm talking about not 150 years ago, right? And so like my like I think that's like how like I feel like there's so much about form and content and way of thinking and way of creating and the sensitivity that is outside of that Eurocentric work, and is not only about races and colors and bodies, but recognizing how to not harm these students. And I feel like as long as like our institutions are run and the people who train don't have any clue about that, like why would you put yourself in that situation? If I would go back, I would never put myself in that situation. I like call it under like the buoyancy of youth that I survived.
Yeah, I guess you're so right about it, and I have the feeling that at least institutions are having this conversation right now. I really do hope that it's not a performative or token conversation. I really hope that it actually translates into action, because it's so true. Like up until not far away, like nobody was talking about how white educators have been in institutions across Canada. in theater, right? And I guess it's just part of the system. It's just how theater has been created in Canada historically. But I just hope this is the time to change it a little bit. But I think there's a lot of work to do in that sense. I just don't think it can change, within a few months. I think a lot of conversations have to happen around it. And yeah, all I can tell you is that I, for like forever, I've always felt like I was never gonna be able to have access to, let alone teach. I have been casually teaching, and I'm really grateful for that. But also, like, in my mind, just having any steady position teaching is completely out of my possibilities because of my accent and because I don't come from that particularly like really heavily British culture at all.
Yeah.
But maybe that will be changing in the next few years, and I certainly hope so, because now students are speaking up about not feeling any kind of representation within the faculties of places as well. So yeah, I wonder if that's, again, hopefully it's gonna change. And like back then when I studied at UBC, I was, oh, this is great. But now I just remember a lot of hard moments that I had by just like being one of the only non-white people within, I guess, not only within the students, but also within the faculty and the whole building. It's not an easy environment, no matter how you.
Totally. And even if you don't remember, I think sometimes we try to like erase our memories in order to be able to survive too, right? I think it's like a very normal.
I'm a total master in internalizing
Yeah.
so no, it's all good. No problem.
Like I think that like, when you talked about that question of like, what kind of future like theater will be, and I think a lot about this, like, the notion of like, inserting or like, bringing like, more equity and diversity into the thing that itself by its legacy has been very white and very patriarchal. And in my experience, at least, like one of the reasons that I do a lot of work with community and with other POC collaborators is like, and those work has been really, really refreshing. And the reason of it is that like we are not constantly in the room in opposition to something, like I feel like a lot of times, even in spaces that are equitable, it's like you're constantly, group of POC people gather, and then you're still like in opposition to the whiteness that is not even in the room, and that takes so much energy. But when you work with community members that they're all like kind of wanting to make the work outside of that Eurocentric or legacy, then you suddenly are like, okay, this is actually fucking amazing, like I don't need to spend that energy like kind of like trying to bring those notions in, but actually to create a different form of creation, and I think that to me is one of the things that I'm super excited about coming out of this.
Me too. And I've been thinking a lot about it, about how, again, in my few opportunities that I've had of teaching, how I'm finally just thinking, no, this has to change, but how does it materialize? I'm a little scared of creating a syllabus that I would call decolonized. I feel like I basically would need to go back to teaching school. It's like there's so much pedagogy. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's so much involved in creating a program, right? As outside of what we know, of what we've seen for so long. But I'd definitely be super interested in seeing anybody who, apparently there's a few people in the States who have been working on that, and I'm gonna read more about it. I'll send you links if you're interested.
We can make a program together.
The thing that comes up for me around this is just like Fay, like you were saying, the amount of time we spend in rooms to translate for like the language of BIPOC people, or for any equity seeking group. Like I'm often in rooms with all white, but also I might be the only man in the room. And so I always have to think to myself, there are some things where I need to speak up as the only person who's not white in the room, while also making sure that I don't take up so much space that I'm erasing the women in the room. And it's kind of this back and forth kind of thing to think about. And I do think that like that privilege is contextual in the space that you are in that moment. And I think about like kind of going back to some of the things that you were both of you were mentioning. So when COVID happened, when it started in March, like, so when everything was like shut down in March, like there's a lot of privilege that I still have my other job, which, you know, I feel good about. And then the work for me here at GVPTA increased dramatically. And so I now have these two positions where I do get paid. And this struggle between self-care, like both of you have talked about, and that during this time, I am making money. I have a lot of privilege. I can make a lot of choices that other people can't. And for me, thinking temporarily in some ways is that I will sacrifice a bit of my self-care in order to recognize that there's greater good to be done. And I don't do that as a martyr or anything like that. It's just like daily at the very start of of COVID, we sent out the impact survey, and it was like the first like week, we got over 100 responses, and it was all fine. It was like reading all the responses, like this is the impact of artists and organizations. But as I was reading the open-ended questions, where it was like, anything else you'd like to share, it was a shit show of things to read. It was so hard. Like, it was so hard to read through all that. And then that just pushed it forward around, I can't, like, everybody tells me to take a break. Everybody's like, you need to take your weekends. You need to take a holiday. I'm like, first of all, whoever really takes a holiday in the arts anyway, because that just gives a holiday as an opportunity to do other work that you wanted to do rather than the work that you're hired to do. And so in some ways it's fulfilling. But it is like this, it's weird thing of, yeah, I get self-care. We preach it all the time, and we do want to prioritize that as it for everybody. And it's self-determination. That's basically it. Everybody needs to self-determine about what they choose to do and not to do. But that's like all these pieces of the responsibility, the community-based or role-based responsibilities, and individual responsibilities, or family responsibilities, right? Because when our family used to own or run a restaurant until last year. I think it was April of last year, we closed it down after 39 years. But every weekend, my brother and I, one of us would go and work there. And everybody's like, you're good sons for taking time out every weekend to come here. And I'm like, well, first of all, it's family first, and I make everything else work, right? Yeah. But it's still, it's a weird thing of people. I get uncomfortable when people like, don't forget to take a break, Kenji. I'm like, yeah, I know, thank you, but just let it go. In some ways.
Yeah, breaks are good though. Carmen and I are taking break.
I'm loving my break. It's the strangest thing. I'm loving it so much. I thought we were gonna be off for about a month when everything shut down in March. I don't know why. I was like, oh, just take a month off and then I'll just move on to Bar on the Beach. But I'm just realizing that at the fourth month mark, I'm just recovering right now.
Uh-huh.
You know, like the last 2.5 or 3 months, it's been basically just catching up with really basic stuff, like cleaning up my house properly and, you know, cooking. And now it's just like after 4 months, I'm finally like, oh, I have some energy to do some creative work or like meet with my colleagues to see what's the next step to make things hopefully a little bit better. But for the last few years, it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is how crazy it has been that I've been neglecting so much the self-care part of me that I have nothing left even for myself, you know. But I agree with you, Kenji. Sometimes like I hear that a lot in, you know, when I'm working, like, oh, just make sure that you get a good rest tonight. And sometimes you're coming back home and you still have to reply to 10 emails that are all of them, you know, crucial or have complicated information, or so you can't just choose to take care of yourself and let the world fall apart, right? In those cases. So is it realistic?
What does self-care actually look like for both of you?
Well, I think for me, like one of the things that has been really positive, I'm very, very busy. I'm working on a lot of projects, but I'm really working with every single person that I'm working with. I love them. Like, so that has been really incredible. Like, I'm really enjoying the collaborations. They're all through Zoom. It takes more energy, but they are people that I want to be in the room with. So I'm not spending any energy doing anything else except actually talking and creating. So that to me is self-care, choosing who I want to work with and working the way I want to work. The concept of time has changed. So actually we are giving longer development time to things, which to me is a very kind of, it should be the model rather than like 3 weeks in the rehearsal, 4th week the production, like, you know. So like kind of having that time and looking at the notion of like urgency, as you said, in a very different way, which is more about how to create the work, and rather than this like kind of like capitalist mentality of the product. So all of that, like for me, and then being able to go for bike rides and spend more time with my wife has been, you know, really, really, really good, you know, like minus the fear of like, you know, family and friends that are in Spain and in Iran, like all of that. But outside of that, it's been good.
Carmen?
How about you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess it's, you know, if I was in a like a full-time work environment, which I'm not, I would, love to have time to think about my project, to actually dig into the context and like do my research properly and not being always constantly rushed by a deadline. Sleep, and also I've been discovering lately that I've been having so much time to meet with people who I love, and in the past I just couldn't get together. It was just the eternal let's get together one of these days, but never happening, because again, if I would get a day off, I just would have to do laundry that day, right, or go get some groceries. But now it's just been a lot of like just basically connecting with people, which I guess in the past I didn't have, and it's totally making me question, why do we live like this? Why if we can't even have time to enjoy ourselves with the people we love, what does all this art mean? You know, like if we're only creating in a capitalistic way for others who are going to pay to see the show, but you're not able to give yourself a good life of quality, like what is the purpose of this art?
It's so doing something like this, it really relaxes me. It actually does. Like, it's, you know, this is technically work, I guess, in some ways, but like it's true, like these kinds of conversations really, really energizes me, and really like to the things to think about. And there many years ago, I was at a counselor for, you know, just talking through my feelings, which was great, and I would recommend it to anybody. And
I'm a big fan too.
Yeah, and so they told me, so they asked me, do you believe you're an introvert or an extrovert, and that whole thing, and I said, well, I feel like I'm a little bit of both. I really like to just sometimes spend my own time and do that, and then I love hanging out with friends, and I love going to events and you know, see people. And then he said, based on everything you've told me in the weeks, you are an extreme extrovert. I'm like, oh, that's, I was really surprised about that. And he's like, yeah, it's everything's about the energy, where you get your energy and all that kind of stuff. But it was, I mentioned it because it's those opportunities to learn something about myself that I didn't actually realize. And I feel like I get a lot of that, you know, talking to the both of you or talking to my partner about, you know, anything. And it's just new things. It's always super interesting to me. But the other thing in terms of self-care, that was the original thing, but I have this paint by numbers app on my phone. And it really relaxes me. It's just
paint by numbers?
Paint by number, yeah. So it's all the things that we did as kids, or many of us did as kids, but it's on an app and you just put the numbers and it makes a beautiful image. Honestly, for some reason, that thing really, really relaxes me, and I spend way too much time on it. Yeah.
That's great.
I downloaded a soccer game too on my phone. It relaxes me. It doesn't relax my
things
partner.
that we're learning from you guys. That's amazing. I've been going down the rabbit hole of we have a small project with Bard on the Beach of creating a video, and I've been just like taking so much time to do my research and finding like just different angles, and then just completely getting blown away by, oh my God, I didn't know this. So I'm just trying to get some Shakespeare in Spanish there, but it's just totally taking me into places where I usually don't have time to go. It's just like, get it done. This is what we need. Okay, done, deadline. And now it's more like, oh, this is leading me to this other link, and this other link is taking me to this other thing. So total nerding out about the new Spain and what Mexico was after the conquest.
As we're 4 minutes away from ending, are there any last thoughts? There are some questions in here, but I feel like we've kind of answered some of the curiosities that other people had. So I don't think we need to go over them. Any last thoughts to share as part of this inaugural kind of quest, and other questions that you have, or I don't know. It's our time. We get 4 minutes.
We get 4 minutes.
Thank you so much for me. Like, thank you for having us, Kenji. And it was lovely to chat with both you and Carmen. Yeah, it was exciting.
Yeah, it was nice. And it was definitely a different format. And I appreciate how relaxed it was. And perhaps this conversation could be taken off the Zoom and into a park with distance measures and beers.
That's the one thing we're missing is a drink in our hands in some way.
I think that will be great next time.
Yeah, it's an interesting format. Again, I'm happy with how it unfolded, and thank you so much for both of you for taking the plunge in this format. I will say, just for folks who are watching, I can say our next webinar series is going to be our webinar session August 13th, and that's going to be with Chelsea Haberlin from New World Theatre and Jiv Paris-Ram from Rumble Theatre. So it's going to be a very similar format, and people can register now for that if you want to. And then we'll have, I think we'll do 2 in August, and then we're going to continue to do some in September and in October. But this is going to continue to be an experiment, and we'll see how it goes. But thank you to both of you, and I'm sure I'll see you both soon, or email, or however we want to.
Yeah, it's been great, and so good to see you, Kenji,
Yes.
as well. I haven't seen you in a while.
It's true. Yeah. Only through this.
Only
right?
through this.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, Fay. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
2 minutes early. Who would have thought?